Hi and welcome to an introduction to owl pellet analysis. This is part of the mammal series, and the reason we're looking at owl pellets is because of the predominantly mammal-based contents of those pellets. We'll be following the entire process through from the collection of pellets all the way to the identification of the remains that you find within. So the first thing for us to think about is the collection of those owl pellets. The first thing I've got on the list here is permission. So once you have located a roost, do you actually have permission to go there? So please be aware that it's advisable to get permission before you start snooping around a barn that actually belongs to somebody. Even if that barn is next to a public right-of-way, that doesn't automatically mean that you've got permission to actually then take yourself off of that right-of-way and into some building that belongs to another person. The other side of that is safety. So owls quite often use barns, particularly in the Dales, that are in various states of disrepair. It's perfect for the owl because if the barns aren't used anymore, the disturbance is limited. But that means that there's a possibility that going into that building is not actually safe for you to do. When we think about going into these places, consideration for the animals that actually live there is something that we need to make sure of. So make sure that you are keeping your disturbance of those owls to a minimum. That means keeping noise levels down and also thinking about the time of year that you actually go and collect pellet. In particular, you will want to think about, say, breeding season and avoiding that time to go to the roost. The last point on here I've written report the roost. So there are various organisations that will want to know about that roost, particularly barn owl roosts. And around here we're thinking about the potential of reporting to the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority. They are likely to want to know where owls are in fact nesting, and we would also want to think about reporting that roost to organisations such as the Barn Owl Trust, and you can go onto their website and follow links in order to do that. The other option is to purchase pellets, and this takes away all of the issues that we've just talked about. What you will want to be aware of though is that you are getting your pellets from a UK supplier, and the main reason for that is that when you come to identifying the contents, if you've got an owl pellet from an owl that's abroad, you're not going to be able to use the UK based mammal identification keys to identify the contents of that owl pellet. So make sure that you're getting from a UK supplier, and I've put source. So just because somebody is selling those owl pellets in the UK doesn't necessarily mean they have been collected in the UK. So it is really important to check those details before you purchase. Equipment wise, it's wise to have some dedicated equipment in order to do this. You can be inventive with the things that you use. You don't necessarily have to purchase items specifically for this. I just imagine that if you were to, say, use a white plate that people then eat off, they may well be a little bit upset to find that you've used that to dissect owl pellets. So what I've got pictured here is what I use. So we've got a white tray, and the white colour actually helps us in terms of when we're breaking the owl pellet up, you've got that contrasting colour so you can actually see more easily what you're taking out of the owl pellet. We've got tweezers to pull the contents of the owl pellet apart. Some of the items that we're going to retrieve from the owl pellet will be quite small, so the tweezers will help us to retrieve those and separate them out from the rest of the contents. Another thing is the guide. So I've got my preferred options, but there are a lot of things out there. And what you might want to do is download the handout that comes with this video, because I've taken some free resources from the PB, and I've put those on there. There are also some links to alternative identification guides. As with any identification guide, it's a case of having a go with different versions and seeing what suits you best. People take to different guides and keys differently. The ones that you can see in the picture, the first two, the analysis of owl pellets, is a Mammal Society publication that is detailed further on the handout, again associated with these courses, on further reading. We also have the How to Identify Mammals guide, which is available to buy also from the Mammal Society. The other thing that I use is a printout of some pictures from the Barn Owl Trust that I've downloaded and printed, and I keep those on hand because I tend to find photographs more helpful than drawings, so that helps me. The last thing that's on there is hand lens, and I would say a ×10 hand lens would be sufficient. If you've got a microscope, then brilliant, that's going to work too. And the other thing to bear in mind before you go and purchase things is that if you have got a smartphone, the cameras that are on them are pretty phenomenal now. And in terms of the detail that you'll need in order to do the identification, you can take a pretty good photograph using your mobile phone and the zoom on it, which will allow you to identify the teeth patterns that we're going to be looking at. So what I'm going to follow this up with is some video footage that will go through the next few steps. So soaking the pellet, separating the contents, and then what we'll do is we'll come back to some photographs and the PowerPoint presentation to identify the contents. Okay, so we've got the setup to do our owl pellet dissection, and some of the things that I've got here is the tray. I've put the owl pellet in the tray, and I've also got two guides here. So the first one is how to find and identify mammals, and it's this page that I'm actually interested in. So this has got all of the different teeth patterns that we're going to use. And we've also got a slightly more advanced key, which is the analysis of owl pellets, which talks about all the different bones that you will find or potentially find in your owl pellet. So the first thing that we're going to do, having put this in our tray, is we're going to pour some water in. Now the water is just going to loosen the contents of the owl pellet. We'll need to leave this to soak for a little while. We want to soften it and get all the air out, and the amount of time you need to leave your owl pellet in the water will vary depending on how dried your owl pellet is. So at this point the owl pellet has been soaking for about half an hour, and all we're going to do with some tweezers, and you can use whatever you've got to hand, just I'd sort of be careful about rummaging through your kitchen drawers willy-nilly, because you'll need to make sure that you're able to wash everything really well after you've had an owl pellet contents on there. So we're just teasing apart the contents of this owl pellet. You can see that a large proportion of the pellet is fur, and what we need to try and do is separate, as you can see, all the bits of bone. So what we've done is we separated out the owl pellet as much as we can at this stage. So we have got a whole area here where you can see the fur, which tends to float a little bit onto the surface. You can see we've got some smaller bones here. It's quite difficult to use these smaller bones in identification to species. So, and also because we're doing a mammals course, we're going to focus on the mammals remains that we've got in here. So what we're actually going to focus on are these bones here. So we've actually managed to separate 1, 2, 3, 4 skull sections of small mammals, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lower jaw sections. And the next steps that we'll go through will cover how you can use these sections of skull and lower jaw to identify to species level what small mammal you have got in your owl pellet. Once we've separated the skull from the main contents of the owl pellet, the first thing that we want to look at is the structure of the skull itself. We're going to be separating these skulls into two groups. We've got the insectivores and we've got the rodents. For our small mammals, it's going to be instantly obvious that that particular animal is of a small stature and a small size. We've got here the main section of the insectivore key, so that's our shrews. And you can see from the key that it separates off the mole instantly. So the mole in its structure will have a very similar structured skull to the shrews, but it will be much, much larger and instantly obvious that it's not a shrew. As we know, the shrews are quite small in size, although we should really be quite careful in just using size as an indication of species, predominantly because if you, say, get a juvenile rodent versus an adult shrew, size is going to be pretty insignificant. The rodents have got quite a substantial skull and they will have really large incisors at the front as long as the skull has not decayed to a point where you can't see that. Those incisors tend to be an orange or yellow colour. The insectivores tend to have a much narrower skull with an elongated nose section. And what we're actually interested in looking at in the case of the shrews are the lower jaw sections of the skull. And these can be pretty tiny, so you're going to have to pay particular attention if you're going to be able to find those within your owl pellet contents. We've got some photos here, so this is a photo just to reiterate what we were saying about the structure of the shrew skull. We've got the main skull element and then an elongated section, which is the nose part of the head. We can see it's quite narrow. And if we flip it over, we can see the teeth. They're quite sharp little teeth, and you can see the red tint to the ends of the teeth. Unless they're quite well worn, then all of our shrews have that red tint at the end of their teeth. We've got a photograph of the lower jaw section, and the first thing that I should mention is the size. This particular jaw is 12 millimeters in length. Now the key actually asks us to pay close attention to the end tooth, and we're looking for cusps or nodules on that particular tooth. The fact that this photograph, you can see that this jaw hasn't got those cusps, we can instantly disregard the fact that there is a water shrew that we're dealing with here. So the water shrew doesn't have any cusps on that end tooth. So what we're looking at is whether this is a common shrew or a pygmy shrew. Again, size at 12 millimeters, it's more likely to be a common shrew than a pygmy shrew. But if we look at the cusps, as pygmy shrew, the key tells us we've got 4 evenly spaced cusps, whereas on the common shrew we've got 2 cusps in a pair, a gap and 2 more cusps. Now it's actually quite challenging on this photograph, and I believe that actually the end cusps are a little bit worn. What we've actually got here is a common shrew lower jaw, and you can see that we've got 2 lumps clearly obvious at the rear of that end tooth. We've got a gap, and then we've got what looks like to be quite a long elongated cusp, and what I actually believe that to be is 2 cusps that are worn down a little bit. So I'm reasonably confident that what we've got here is the lower jaw of a common shrew. If we move on to the rodents, as you can see, we've got quite a robust shaped skull, and those incisors, very yellow colour on the skull on the right hand side there. Using the key again, what we're looking at is the teeth, but this time we're looking at the teeth on the upper jaw. So we're looking at the main skull section, that's the main bit that's going to give us an idea to species. Now, when you look at the teeth on the lower jaw, because the teeth are quite different between the voles and the mice, you will be able to tell whether it is in fact a lower jaw of a vole or a mouse. But it's, as I said, the upper jaw, so the skull section, that we're going to be having a closer look at. If we have a look at this skull here, you can see that we've got separate teeth. They're not in zigzag pattern. And when we remove the teeth, we've got some root sections instantly, obviously visible. So when we zoom in, what we're actually looking at here are how many root sockets are left behind. And if you've still got the teeth in there, if you just use your tweezers, you can reasonably easily prise those teeth out without damaging the skull itself. So if we have a look at this particular picture, you can see we've got 4 sockets visible. And from the key, we can see that 4 sockets tells us we've got a wood mouse. If we have a look at this skull here, you can see that we've got this zigzag pattern that is of the voles. The difference between the two is that the bank vole tooth, if you pull out the bank vole tooth, it'd be quite ridged, but you can see there are 2 root sections at the base of the tooth. The field vole, if you pull that tooth out, it would just come out as one large section. And the edges of that zigzag pattern are quite sharp, and it almost looks as though the inner section of each of those segments is hollow. So if we compare that against the picture, you can see that what we've got in the picture is a field vole rather than a bank vole. I just wanted to finish off going back to the point I made previously about taking photographs to use as identification tools. So if you don't feel as though you're in a position to buy a hand lens or a magnification device, or you just think, actually, my phone's really good, I'm going to take some pictures, I just wanted to show you that I took this on my smartphone, and it's not as good as the other photos that we've got, but it's of good enough quality for us to actually be able to see those root sockets on that skull and be able to use this photo to help us identify the species that we've got. As we come to the end of our video on owl pellet analysis, the last thing on our list is about reporting findings. Now, you're under no obligation to report your findings, but you might want to think about, at the very least, what that information tells you. So, a few things, a few helpful hints and places to go. On the RSPB download that we have used throughout this presentation to identify the contents of owl pellets, there is a section at the end that talks about how you can display some of your findings, but it also talks about what that owl pellet will tell you about the bird that you have taken that owl pellet from. So the mammals give us an idea in terms of their behaviour as to when that bird is active. So if you've got predominantly voles, then voles are typically active between dawn and dusk, whereas predominantly mice, you know that they are hunting in the night time. Where it hunts, so if you're thinking about the habitats that these small mammals prefer, then again, if you predominantly find one species over another, then it gives you an idea of where that animal is hunting. But also on the flip side, the animals that make up the contents of that owl pellet will give you an idea as to what's going on with that small mammal population in that particular area as well. Alternatively, if you want to submit some scientific records, then there's a few routes that you can go down. So the Mammal Society website, they give you a form to fill in order to submit your records, and it's quite easy to find from their homepage. You go to recording mammals and the options will come up there. So the first option available to you is to submit records, and it comes up with a form and you fill in a very simple form, and it gives you an option to upload a photo. So in this case, you can upload a photo of the skull, and one of the observation types the options that are available for that section of the form, you can enter that the animal was deceased, and obviously in the case of an owl pellet finding, that would be the case. The Mammal Society also give you options in order to find your local mammal recorder. So again, from the main homepage for the Mammal Society, you go to Recording Mammals and you'll have the option to go to that section of the website, and you'll be able to scroll through your local area and find out who your local recorder contact is. The other thing you might want to do if you've got a particular interest in mammals and you want to know more, then you can join the Yorkshire Mammal Group, and you can go to their homepage and get all the information you need about the group, the kind of events they do, and how you can join. I hope you've enjoyed the video about owl pellet analysis, and please check out the other mammal-based videos that the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust has available.